12-year-old Mary Kellerman was a student at Jane Addams Junior High.
35-year-old Paula Prince.
28-year-old Adam Janis was...
Stanley and Teresa Janis, newlyweds.
15 hours later, 6 other people were dead under similar circumstances.
It was the beginning of a nightmare for Chicago, a nightmare that is still not over for some. 7 people were dead because someone had laced capsules of extra-strength Tylenol with cyanide.
It was really easy to tamper with a bottle back in 1982 because there were no seals. They didn't have any of that preventatives. Anyone could just tamper with whatever and go back to the store and just put it back on the shelf as if nobody has ever touched it.
This product may be contaminated with cyanide and should be destroyed.
So Adam Janis was my father, Stanley Janis and Teresa Tereshevitz Janis. They were my uncle and aunt.
My name is Teresa Janis. My husband Adam, he went to pick up my daughter from preschool, and then he stopped at Jura to buy something for lunch.
So we went to the store, and just as a silly 4-year-old, I would run ahead of my dad. I decided to run down a particular aisle, which it was the aisle where they had the Tylenol bottles. So I was pointing. As I was pointing, I didn't realize that where I was pointing, it was in the same vicinity of where the Tylenol bottles were located. And instead of taking what I wanted, he took what he wanted. And that was the Tylenol. And we go home.
A frightening pattern began to take shape some 5 hours later in the neighboring suburb of Arlington Heights when 28-year-old Adam Janis was admitted to Northwest Community Hospital. His heart and lungs had collapsed. He died a short time later.
He came, he put the grocery on the kitchen counter, and then he took the Tylenol, and then all of a sudden he said that I don't feel good. And he was, unconscious and, shaking his head. So I ran outside because I saw neighbors. So I ran and asked them to come. And the one lady who came, Diane, she was a nurse. So also she tried to help him, doing some CPR. And then also the other friend called for 911.
When I got to my dad, I kept whispering and just moving his arm and just whispering in his ears, saying, "It's me, Tata, it's me. You can wake up now. I know you're playing a game. You can wake up now." But before you know it, the paramedics were surrounding us. And all I can hear from a gentleman, he just said, "We need to get these kids out of the room."
25-year-old Stanley Janis and his 19-year-old wife Teresa went to Adams' Arlington Heights home after learning of his death. It was here that they both took contaminated Tylenol and later died.
Me and Adam's family, mother and sister and brothers, they came to my home to prepare to arrange the funeral. Half an hour later, Stanley and Teresa said that they have headache, so also they took the Tylenol. And a couple minutes later, I think Stanley first collapsed in the kitchen, and then couple of seconds later, Teresa was in the living room, and then she collapsed. So then they called ambulance, and again.
3 hearses, 3 caskets, and 3 members of the same family arrived this morning at St. Hyacinth's Catholic Church on the northwest side. Father Gotsky said God took the Janises because it was time. After the near hour-and-a-half mass, Teresa Janis collapsed at her car, but continued on to Mary Hill Cemetery in Niles, where her husband, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law were buried.
After Stanley died, doctors began to suspect some kind of poisoning was involved in the deaths, and they were right. Tests showed high levels of cyanide in the blood of all 3 victims.
Cyanide happens to be a drug that can cause sudden death.
We hope to get some
Operating Control Center.
We've been receiving calls about once every 15 seconds.
We would like them to get it out of their home.
Cyanide-contaminated Tylenol has been responsible for 3 deaths in the Arlington Heights area. Not take Tylenol until further notice.
2 paramedics and an Arlington Heights doctor found a common link. All the victims had taken Tylenol. The hunt for the killer was on.
The questions who and why screamed for answers. Law enforcement agencies formed a task force to begin sorting out a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that, so far, didn't fit.
We are now pleased to announce that we are reintroducing Tylenol to the city of Chicago in safety seal packaging.
They made it official where you had to have everything sealed, required. So after the 1982 Tylenol poisonings, it was then required to have sealed bottles. And with Johnson & Johnson, they were doing a triple seal.
The product was later reintroduced in stores around the country after Johnson & Johnson developed a triple seal safety package. That way, consumers could detect if the product had been tampered with.
Bestseller Tylenol had completely recovered from the Chicago disaster. In fact, sales were now higher than before the poisonings.
The investigation has continued. Millions of dollars, and a year later, the task force manpower stands at 10. The investigation has produced 2 major characters. James Lewis is charged with writing an extortion letter demanding $1 million to stop the killing.
When James Lewis was arrested 2 months after the Tylenol murders, he claimed to have been in New York when the killings occurred, but detectives were never able to verify his alibi. Their best evidence, Lewis's letter to Johnson & Johnson offering to stop the murders for $1 million, an admission of guilt to many investigators. The letter was not sufficient for a murder indictment. Lewis was sentenced to 20 years for extortion and mail fraud.
Seem like the perfect crimes. A killer strikes at random in the city and in the suburbs without ever setting eyes on his victims.
40 years ago this week, one of the country's most infamous
Deaths set off panic across the Chicagoland area. In total, 7 people would die. To this day, the case remains.
At this time, we have no idea who put the poison in the Tylenol. After 41 years, it's still unknown. It's still unsolved. It's probably one of the longest unsolved mysteries here in the United States. We don't know.
September 1982. That is my family story. I encourage you to remember after watching this film that life is short. Remember to cherish every moment you have with the ones closest to you, because you never know when that time might end. Thank you.